Hello, everybody, and welcome to a special episode of the Project Infinite podcast, the podcast covering the infinite and ever-expanding multiverse of fandom, from movies, comics, TV shows, video games, water, Pandora. We've got you covered. I'm Rob. I'm here, as always, with Court. And Court, we just got done seeing Avatar Way of the Water, and we just wanted to hop on and do a quick little non-spoiler review for those of you who haven't seen it. And, man, it was crazy.
Crazy, I think, is an understatement. Is that my new catchphrase, is saying things are understatements?
Is that a catchphrase?
It might be. Who's to say? However, this movie, this was definitely a film.
Yeah. So, I mean, I was confident, as we both have been over the past however long we've been talking about this movie, that it was probably going to be good. But, I mean, there was that little kernel in the back of my mind, like, was I, like, hopped up on nostalgia for the first one? Like, was the first one as good as I thought it was, even after seeing it again, however long ago that was that we saw it? So I was like, is this going to be kind of a bummer, like a letdown? Like, is this not going to be what it was? And happy to report, no, this movie was absolutely fantastic. It improves on the first one, I think, in every fathomable way that it could have. This movie had a lot of heart, which I think the first one could be lacking at times, and there were clear personal stakes in this movie that I think the first one might have been maybe lacking a little bit. I mean, for all the people that said, like, the first one had no real story, I feel like this one gave us a story, gave us definitive character arcs for a multitude of characters, and just, I mean, the visuals alone. How do you improve on that first one? You do this one.
Yeah. And I mean, the biggest thing I took from that is narratively. I think this is a dang good story, and this is a story that people are not only, I think, going to enjoy, but more or less, I think this might be a story that people really resonate with, because at the end of the day, this is simply just a story about a family, and it's not Dom Toretto's family. But seriously, this is a story. It's a good story about a family and what you do to keep that family safe. There's a lot of through lines about, the father and what the father's role in the family is supposed to do as the protector. That's really, really a strong theme, and I think they play on it really well. I think this is probably the best Sam Worthington has been, period, in his career. He's the most resonant, and I think a lot of, people that have children and a lot of men that have children are going to kind of look at his role and look at what he kind of portrayed on screen and kind of, connect to that a bit. I really enjoyed him. Zoe Saldana obviously was amazing as Neytiri. Her connection to this world, I think, was one of the best parts of one, and she kind of doubles down on that in two. But I think my MVPs might be these kids. These kids are really emotionally resonant. They go through trials and tribulations, like you said. They go on arcs, and specifically his younger son goes on he's the main character of this, essentially. So if you want to look at this story from his perspective, he goes on an arc. He goes on this arc of discovery, essentially, and kind of, I love how impulsive he is. I love characters that make mistakes. I love characters that are headstrong, because it makes them feel more real. Like, things that everybody says they won't do, they'll do it. And he's one of those people that'll do it, but it pays off. It pays off for him big time. Yeah,
I totally agree with that point. There's a neat kind of parallel to the two boys in Jake's family and Jake and his own brother. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Whereas it's a really interesting dynamic where Jake is kind of favoring the son that his brother kind of was, right? And the son he's kind of, distancing from is the son that he was, the one that, wasn't kind of built to be where they are,
right?
But end up rising to the occasion, rising to the moment, which I thought was really cool.
Right. And you want to talk spectacle. This really is December's a battleground, essentially, for the blockbuster. It's really something that can hold. Usually the December blockbuster is the one that kind of brings you into the next year. So this being the last place, I know Star Wars usually takes a lot of time in December. That's usually a big piece, but I think this is the perfect blockbuster to the end of the year. What a great gift for this holiday season, because I think James Cameron delivered on every aspect. I was listening to some interviews that he was doing yesterday, and it's not only his love for this world. It's his resolve for this world, I think, is the best defining quality about him. He's relentless in this and building this world and kind of transporting us somewhere else. I mean, this movie plays around with frame rates, and then every technical aspect is so tight. It's so clear. You can tell there was time spent on it. I just saw a clip of the kids from this movie when they were actually kids, and they're not only the youngest daughter is still kind of a kid, but the rest of them are all adults now. And it's kind of crazy to think, because they started filming, I think, 5 years ago, and they've all grown up. But at the same time, they kind of, made sure that everything was still so locked in and nothing was lost in translation through a pandemic, through, delays, through having this movie come out 13 years after the original. Everything still feels like that world, but it's this enhancement. But it's this enhancement through heart. I think that's the best thing I could say about this movie.
Yeah, I mean, I think, at this point in time, what he's done with the visuals is he's mastered it. Mm-hmm. He's mastered the art of cinematic visualization at this point. Like, I really don't know how you can improve upon what he was able to do. I mean, like you said, toying with the frame rate almost felt like a flex at this point. Like, he was just like, let's just see how this goes, almost kind of, because like every other aspect of the visuals was just flawlessly executed.
Yeah, and I think the point I made to you was what it's supposed to invoke to me is like that National Geographic feel, and that just adds to the realism, essentially, if you will. Like, the idea of putting the frame rate at that, like, either to 48 or to 60, I don't know what he did, but...
It felt like 60.
Yeah, it felt super, like, if you were to slow it down, the slow motion would be really clean. So I think the point was to have it feel like you go on those National Geographic and you go on the channel and you just look at any random thing, and the feel that you get from that, like, being immersed in the water, is essentially what we were. But this movie's got so much art to it. It's got all those things you thought you were missing in one, you get times 10 in this movie, even more than some movies that have come out this year too. So this story is emotionally resonant. I think so many people are going to connect to it. I even want to talk about the theater experience too, because that theater was packed, and and people said, I'm not sitting in a theater to watch a 3-hour movie. People were in that theater to watch that 3-hour movie.
And we don't live in a big... We talk about this all the time. Like, we don't live in a big kind of area. Right. So for that theater that we go to be packed, save maybe like the front rows.
Even the front row had people in it. Like, there were people there. Like, the whole back section was almost completely filled and engaged. The crowd was engaged, especially as we built towards, the third act of the film, which obviously we're not going to talk a ton about, but we talked about this with Top Gun Maverick about people being engaged in the final act of the movie, and people were engaged in this third act in a way that, I can't remember back far enough to 2009 when this first one came out, but I can't remember how engaged people were then, but people were locked into this one. I'll tell you that much. No, it gives me hope for the movie going experience outside of superhero movies. It gives me genuine hope and genuine, looking forward to next year to see some of these bigger movies, if we can get the same type of turnout and start to get all these movies to be seen in theaters. And I mean, this is a 3-hour long movie, but people are still invested 2 hours, 2:15, 2:30 into this movie, all the way up into the Weekend song that plays at the end, which I wasn't expecting.
Yeah, people were majorly invested. I mean, in those payoff moments that you often get in a third act of a movie, people were applauding, were cheering.
There were cheers, there were claps, there were cries. Like, this movie genuinely had everything in it too.
In a movie that, in movies that usually don't invoke those sort of things in crowds, besides the Marvel movies, honestly, I was a bit taken aback by it.
You know why? I think it's because it's earned. This one genuinely feels earned in that third act, because you can definitely tell in the first 20 to 30, it was a feel out. You can kind of read a crowd, so I think it was really a feel out. And what's not the testament to a good movie, at least a good movie, if people aren't engaged in your third act?
They win you over.
Yeah,
the movie, the movie wins you over. Yep. If you're there specifically just for kind of like the visual spectacle. I think by the third act, you're buying into the story and you're buying into the characters, because I think people will probably say the middle bit jags a bit, but that's all. It's all done purposefully to build to all those moments in the third act. Because the third act ostensibly becomes a giant action set piece, involving all these characters that we've seen to this point, and you see the culmination of all that character work that was being done in the middle that some people might interpret as slow, but the payoff is in that third act when you get all those kind of big moments for each of these characters. Really gets kind of a big moment in the final act of the film.
Yeah, that final act really kicks it into overdrive. It understands what I think it understands the grandeur of the situation, but it doesn't portray any emotion. That's one of the biggest compliments I can give. There's not a second I don't feel for any of these characters, any of them, during this third act. There's big payoffs, like you said. There's big pieces where characters get to do cool things, but at the same time, I'm genuinely scared for these characters, and I'm genuinely feeling that I want them to make it out of this.
Yeah, exactly. You nailed it right on the head. It was just all these, it caught me off guard in a sense that, Jake and Neytiri kind of take a backseat through much of this movie. Right.
And I think that's a great decision. It's a decision you don't think is going to happen, but I think it's the right decision because in his youngest son Loak in his story, like, he needs to be essentially the main character of this story and let his dad be kind of, the older sage. I love what they do, and it's something, who I really wanted them to do this with, but we might get it. I don't know if we'll get it. It's Ant-Man in the MCU. Like, Jake Sully easily could have went the other way and still been like the bumbling idiot. He's not anymore. He doesn't even have that. I love it. This idea of the father in this movie is so well executed through him. And there's even more to that, which we need to save for the spoiler. There's that father theme is present. It's probably one of the three big themes of this movie, and we can't even talk about the other half of it yet, but his half of it he handles extremely well. Like I said, this is, I think, the best Sam Worthington has been, period. I think it's because he's much calmer in this, and I love how he treats his kids. He treats his kids like, and Neytiri needs to check him from time to time. Like, he does treat his sons like soldiers, but he kind of needs to. Like, he still is on this alien planet that's hostile. Like, I gotta treat my sons like generals, but you can tell he really is fond of his kids. He really cares for his kids, as ever mad he can be. That's an incredible point about his brother. Like, Loak, he sees himself in Loak, and he doesn't want that. He wants better for him. But at the end of the day, that's what makes him Jake, and what makes his brother is not them being the same. It's them being different. Even though they're twins, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, and I think, obviously this, again, I mean, the plot isn't overly complicated, much like the first one, but I think people mistake the idea that you need a complex plot for it to be good, but sometimes you just gotta show us what you're showing us and make it pay off at the end of the day. Like, if you can execute a relatively simple plot really, really, really well, it shouldn't matter how complex it is at the end of the day. Like, just give us what we're expecting. We don't need big twists and turns. Like, you're clearly building to this thing, build to it and execute it, and you got yourself a hit. And that's what I think this movie does. I mean, there's some interesting world building stuff. There's a lot of interesting lore stuff that happens, but as far as like the plot itself is not something we haven't seen before, as far as like the reluctant kind of, not the formerly reluctant kind of warrior, like laying down his sword and just wanting to take care of his family before he gets dragged into one more big battle. Like, that's essentially what this movie is. And again, like I said, like, you kind of get a sense of when it's all going to come to a head, but when it does, it's super satisfying. Right.
And the villain of this movie, I don't even think we can talk about the villain of this movie, but it's fun. It's fun. It's a bit crass in a good way. Like, it is your prototypical villain that Stephen Lang was in the first one. It's still the same concept, but there's a little more to it this time. I think this movie handles subtlety infinitely better than in the last one. And I'm not talking subtlety in like, just certain little moments. It's subtlety in like the way that people don't deliver these big summer blockbuster lines, like, just calm yourself down a bit and make you feel it a little bit more, like somebody normally would say. Like, it's things like that typically pay off a little bit better. So, the villain in this movie, it's just a cool, dumb villain, but there's more, and I appreciate when there's a little bit more.
Yeah, and it didn't need to be much more. Like, again, like, it's James Cameron comes from a very old school, kind of building block where like the villains don't need to be overly complex as long as they're good antagonists.
Yeah.
And that's what this is.
The iceberg was the antagonist for one. The T-1000. Well, I mean, the T-1000 is probably one of the coolest things that's ever come out. Just, people always forget that this man directed Titanic and Terminator 2. Like, his resume is one of the best resumes you can ask for. He's got loads and loads of movies. That's why, like, you talk about that Mount Rushmore that I always talk about. Like, of like the post-60s era, I think James Cameron belongs on there. I still think it's Tarantino, it's Scorsese, it's James Cameron, and Spielberg are the four, and I think James Cameron sneaks his way into that because of the way he creates worlds. I think is just something that's kind of awe-inspiring.
Yeah, I totally agree. It was awe-inspiring is the right word. Like right from go, like you're like, oh, okay,
wow,
like, this is what this is, and then there's just certain. We'll talk about it, in the spoilers review later in the week when we kind of dive into our favorite moments and scenes, and like there's one specific one that's burned into my brain that I already can't shake. So it's one of those things that just leaves a mark on you. I talked about this a lot when we talked about the first one and how leaving the theater after seeing the first one, like I know I felt something and I wasn't sure what it was, but I knew I felt it, and I questioned at the time whether I would ever feel that again because I really haven't since, and I think I felt it.
I think I felt it a little bit more
leaving this one, like standing up after 3 hours, but just at the same time just being totally awestruck by what I just saw.
Yeah, you know why I love movies, man? It's that sense of community that people don't think about enough. It was like when everybody rose, like it's like one common thing that you feel, and like you just can't explain that feeling, but it feels right. Like I just love the fact that like it was one big diverse group of people in a theater.
Diverse,
and like and there was like too. And we're talking age range, like there were kids to like older adults in there, like people that look like every type of person in there. Like stories like those are resonant because this story doesn't negate anybody from enjoying it or connecting to it.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. I mean, sheesh. Again, it's just unfathomable to me that this even happened. Like, it's unlikely. Yeah. I mean, when you talk about how long it's been, the numerous delays, the ever-inflating budget, I mean, it was, reasonable to question whether like what this was going to be. Right. And
look it up. Look now.
Yeah.
And
I mean, if, because you gotta like, even outside of us, like it's a small bubble, right? So you have to wonder, like, we love the first one, but like you have to wonder, and the first one made almost $3 billion, right, but like, is that still there? Like, is it like, the greatest trick the devil played was convincing the world he didn't exist? Like, did that first one have an element of that where like, was this just one big visual spectacle and then like people will have seen it and then that's it? Like, are they really going to come back for the second one? And I mean, just based on what we saw in person, based on stuff that's coming in early in, it feels like people are interested in this again.
It's just a great example of transportation, like being transported to another world, like not thinking about any of your problems, but you can connect all your problems to that or anything that you're feeling. Like there's a through line for so many people in here, and I think that's super important, and James Cameron nails that. Like I said, like I think he understood the task and the tall tale of, the visual aspect of this whole thing. But I think that the thing that people should really focus on is how good of characters that he built for this, and I'm looking forward to what he does with these characters. I mean, Sigourney Weaver's character is somebody that we 100% need to save for the spoiler talk, because what he does with her is super interesting, builds the world out. There's so much more to this world, and all of this being incepted from his mind is just very inspiring as well for people that want to create stuff. It's just, you look at George Lucas, you look at James Cameron, like you look at these people, and you talk about like guys like Tarantino, new modern, master of this is Jordan Peele. Like, people that are just going into their minds and then just finding stories and worlds out of their mind, I think is absolutely incredible. And I think they deserve all the credit in the world, because making movies is one of the most difficult things, and making the story for the movie is even infinitely more difficult. So, and he did all that, and he doesn't have any intention to stop. And based off what Zoe Saldana was saying and what he was saying, if you think this is good, like 3 and 4 are like, those are the ones, like, those are the ones that are going to be like, people aren't going to understand what's happening.
Yeah, I mean, in hindsight, it just feels like the first whole movie was building to this one. You know what I mean? Like, the first one did so much foundational work for the world, for the characters, that when we got to this one, we felt comfortable in a way that we probably wouldn't have. And, you know, if that first movie had flopped, you know, we might not even get this one. You know what I mean? And at this point, I feel like he's kind of earned the good graces to be like, man, if you thought the second one was good, wait till the third one. Because, you know, walking out, I think I said to you, I was like, yeah, I'm gonna need that third movie. Like, yep. I'm totally in now. So, man, it was special. Yeah.
Special, I think, is the right word. It's just that feeling you get. Again, it's one of those things you can't put your finger on it, but when you feel it, you feel it. And I think a lot of people are going to feel that.
I think so, too. I think this movie is, you know, just primed for a similar run that the first one had, where, like, you know, I wouldn't say what it's opening to is meager by any stretch, but I think this movie's going to carry, again, just like the first one did. I don't know if it's going to carry to the same lengths. Yeah. Because we talked about it when we talked about the first one, like, just how absurd.
Yeah. And I think the first one was an anomaly, too. I think there's more movies, you know, I don't think there's any movie like this, but I think there's movies like... There were no movies like that, the one in 2009. There was no movies like that out at the time. It's not only, like, the visual aspect, it's also that there's, like, blue aliens that you're following, and, like, you're connecting to these people, and you don't realize why. But this one, I think it makes it much easier. And I think one of the lessons of 2022 in terms of movie going is sometimes simpler is better. I mean, you look at a bombastic movie like Everything Everywhere All at Once. Is it truthfully bombastic in the production design and, like, you know, the lore building and the multiverse aspect, or is it just the simplicity of, you know, a mom and a daughter? Like, is that the thing that I think it's that thing of, like, defense, like, offense sells tickets, but defense wins championships. Like, your offense is your visual aspect, but your defense is your narrative and your character work.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, you know, it's just, like you said, like, he's mastered it. Yeah. At this point. Like, he really has. Like, I don't know what improvements he could possibly make from this one to the third one, but
there's specific moments where you're just questioning if he didn't just paint over people. Like, there's a couple in the movie I genuinely, like, even when they were in the water, there was a couple where I was like, you can't tell me something's not swimming right now. So it's incredible what he was able to do.
Yeah, it really was. Do you have any other things to say
about the Oppenheimer trailer? Because Lord. So, guys, mark your calendars, because July 21st might be the greatest day in cinema history. This might be the day that saves cinema. So we're sitting in the theater, right? And lo and behold, the Barbie trailer comes on, and then it's just 2001: A Space Odyssey, which is insane. And then Christopher Nolan said, "Hold my nuke," and then just dropped one of probably the best trailers I've seen in quite a while. That trailer had, like, my jaw dropped. I think there's a reason why Christopher Nolan's one of the best. I didn't want to leave this without talking about that Oppenheimer trailer, because but when that drops, and, like, just genuinely, like, I do think that this might be Cillian Murphy's, like, defining performance as an actor. Like, obviously he's got Peaky Blinders, but I think this one might be his film, like, I might be one of the best actors of my generation, and I do think he is, and I think he's going to prove it on this one. Yeah, there's this aura around Oppenheimer I can't explain. Like, that movie has something,
and the trailer feeds into that kind of aura. Like, it's
I think it's this aura of, like, there's this, like, fear that's over it, like that, like, idea of, like, when they're building the nuke. Like, it's funny, like, what did I say? That Tenet is like a spiritual prequel / sequel to Oppenheimer, if you think about it. Yeah. Like, what did I say? That Tenet takes place in the same universe, and, like, the post-credit scene of Tenet, or Oppenheimer, is going to be John David Washington coming back from the future to the past and saying, I don't know, this is the detritus of a coming war.
Oh, man, yeah.
Go see Avatar. Go see it. Take
Yeah.
your friends, take your family. I think this movie's for everybody.
Yeah, and see it in a theater because
Yeah.
much like the first one, like this is something that needs to be experienced, you know, in a theater. Again, I'm gonna highly recommend the 3D. Again, which is not something I thought I'd ever say again after the first movie, because you know many have tried since the first Avatar. Many have failed, and again, the 3D aspect of it is necessary.
Yeah,
in my opinion.
The best part is when you don't feel it. That's when, like, that's like anything.
Again, you don't feel it.
Once you don't feel it, that's when you know it's pretty good.
Yeah, totally agree. So that's what we just wanted to come on and chat a little bit about what we experienced. So
I was immersed, James Cameron. Thank you.
Yeah, for real. My legs were immersed.
Yeah. My legs were atrophy by the time I stood up, but it was worth it.
It was very worth it. And so look forward to this coming out relatively soon after we record it, and look forward to our regular Avatar full review discussion and many, many other things regularly on this coming Wednesday. You can follow us at Project INF_pod. You can follow us on Facebook. You can follow us on Instagram
at the Project Infinite Pod.
Thank you very much. You can listen to this and every other episode on Spotify, Apple, Amazon, where Pandora.
Pandora. Both literally and metaphorically and metaphysically after this movie.
Yeah, so
just connect to AWA and then you can listen to the podcast. Like, we're just ingrained in AWA.
We'll be back later in the week for our full review on Avatar, as well as all the news, most of the news of the week, including
is there news.
A tumultuous we thought we were done with the tumultuous periods at DC, but turns out we weren't. So we'll talk about that.
They dropped the biggest one of anything.
We'll talk about that. And Avatar, obviously, Way of the Water. Until then, goodbye.
Peace.